What would you do if the seat you paid for the seat you earned was taken from you? Not because of a mistake, but because of who you are. On Flight 782, a calm and poised black CEO named Naomi Carter boarded with the same first-class ticket as everyone else. Yet she was stopped, questioned, and made to prove herself again and again, while other passengers walked by without so much as a glance from the crew. Was it just procedure, as they claimed, or was it something deeper, something far too familiar for those who've lived through it before? What no one knew was that Naomi wasn't just another passenger. She was the chairwoman of the Congressional Committee on Aviation Safety and Civil Rights, and within minutes, her quiet decisions would plunge the entire airline's booking system into darkness. But what really happened in that cabin? Who stood up? Who stayed silent? And how did one flight become a turning point for an entire industry? Stay with us. This is a story about dignity, power, and the moment when silence is no longer an option. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the stories that matter most. The boarding area for Flight 782 to Reagan National was calm, the way only a midweek afternoon could make it. No crowds rushing, no frantic last-minute announcements. Just the measured hum of the jet bridge fans and the occasional clink of a coffee cup hitting a saucer in the nearby lounge. Naomi Carter stepped forward when her boarding group was called. She wasn't the kind of person to cut in line or to linger behind. Her pace was deliberate, confident without being showy. She carried a worn leather laptop bag over one shoulder and a slim carry-on in her right hand. The navy blazer she wore was tailored but understated, paired with a cream blouse and black trousers. Her shoes were sensible flats, quiet on the floor, but polished enough to show she took herself seriously. Her dark brown skin glowed under the overhead lighting, and her hair was swept into a low, neat bun. In her eyes was that practiced focus of someone who had been on far too many flights, someone who knew every rhythm of boarding, every look from the gate staff, every whispered comment from passengers who thought they were being discreet. The flight attendant stationed at the entrance to the first-class cabin glanced up. Her name tag read, Melissa. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile Naomi had learned to decode years ago, the kind that was part greeting, part evaluation. "Good afternoon," Melissa said, scanning Naomi's boarding pass. Her eyes flicked from the pass to Naomi's face and back again. A faint crease appeared between her brows. "Ma'am, I think you might be in the wrong section." Naomi paused, letting the words land. Around them, other passengers flowed down the jet bridge toward the plane. She could hear the easy laughter of a man in a tailored charcoal suit ahead of her. The warm welcome aboard, Mr. Whitford from Melissa just seconds earlier. But now the tone had shifted. Naomi wasn't Ms. Carter or welcome aboard. She was a question mark. "No," Naomi said, her voice even. "I believe this is my seat." Melissa's eyes didn't soften. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi handed it over without hesitation. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh. It clearly stated, Seat 2A, First Class. Melissa held it up, tilted it slightly, as though an invisible watermark might reveal a different truth. She nodded slowly, still looking uncertain. "All right," she said finally. "Go ahead." Naomi walked down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin. The leather seat at 2A looked almost like it was waiting for her. She placed her laptop bag in the overhead bin and slid her carry-on beside it. Sitting down, she felt the seat mold to her shape, the armrest cool under her palm. For a moment, the world outside the cabin faded, replaced by the low thrum of the aircraft systems and the faint scent of citrus from the freshly cleaned surfaces. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Melissa greeting the man in 1A again, Charles Whitford. This time, Melissa leaned in slightly, voice warm and easy. "Can I get you a glass of champagne before takeoff?" Charles nodded without looking up from his phone. No boarding pass check, no ID request, just a seamless welcome. Naomi reached for her phone. A notification glowed on the lock screen, "System access ready." She tapped the screen off and slid the device into the seat pocket. Timing mattered, and she wasn't ready yet. Melissa reappeared at her side. "I'll need to see your ID. Please." Naomi looked up, brows raised. "I showed you my boarding pass." "Yes," Melissa said quickly, "but we've had situations lately. Just to make sure everything matches." Naomi pulled her driver's license from her blazer pocket and handed it over. Melissa examined it like it was a counterfeit bill, holding it close, then far, comparing the photo to Naomi's face with deliberate slowness. She didn't look at the other passengers, didn't see the way Charles sipped his champagne without a single question asked, didn't see the quiet glance from Margaret Langston in 3B as she leaned toward her husband to whisper something Naomi couldn't hear. "Thank you," Melissa said finally, returning the ID. "I'll be right back." Naomi leaned back in her seat, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She'd been here before. Not this exact cabin, not with these exact people. But in this moment, the one where your presence becomes a silent debate in someone else's mind, where they weigh whether you belong based on everything except the truth written on the ticket in your hand. Her eyes drifted toward the forward galley, where Melissa now spoke to a man in a pressed Navy uniform. Patrick Doyle, the purser, had the stride of someone who thought he could solve problems with a single decisive step. He glanced toward Naomi, then walked over. "Ma'am," Patrick began, his tone polite but edged with authority. "May I see your boarding pass as well?" Naomi handed it over again. He studied it briefly, then asked, "Do you have the credit card used to purchase this ticket?" She retrieved her wallet, produced the sleek black card embossed with her name, and placed it in his hand. He turned it over twice, as though the magnetic strip might confess a hidden crime. "Thank you," he said, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. "We've had a number of incidents recently with irregular purchases." Naomi didn't flinch. "And by irregular, you mean," Patrick hesitated, glancing toward the other passengers, "people attempting to sit in first class without paying for it." Naomi's phone buzzed in the seat pocket. She ignored it. Timing still mattered. Patrick handed back the card and boarding pass. "We'll just be confirming a few things with the captain before departure." "Of course," Naomi said softly. He walked away, leaving behind a low hum of whispers from nearby seats. Margaret Langston's voice rose just enough for Naomi to catch, "In my day, people knew their place." Naomi looked out the window at the tarmac, where ground crew in reflective vests moved like chess pieces in an endless game. She'd been underestimated before. She knew how to wait, inside. Her thoughts were steady, deliberate. 25 minutes. That's all it would take. Naomi adjusted the seatbelt across her lap, the smooth click echoing in the hushed first-class cabin. The space carried that muted pre-flight energy, the low rustle of newspapers, the soft chime of boarding announcements from the terminal still drifting through the open door, and the occasional metallic clink from the galley. She could feel the way eyes lingered on her, just long enough to be noticeable, before darting away when she met their gaze. Melissa reappeared, her smile a little tighter this time, her voice carrying that precise tone service staff use when they want to sound polite but remain firmly in control. She offered Charles another top-off of champagne, bending slightly to ensure the bottle was angled just right. Charles barely glanced up from his phone, murmuring his thanks without looking at her. No boarding pass, no ID, no mention of irregular purchases. The ease of it was like a spotlight on the contrast. Naomi watched as Melissa straightened and smoothed her skirt before gliding toward Margaret in 3B, her voice warm and light. "Can I get you anything before we depart?" Margaret declined with a practiced wave, then cast another look toward Naomi, her lips pressing into a thin line. Melissa's steps slowed as she turned back toward Naomi's row. "Ms. Carter, I'll need to ask you again to confirm your ticket information. Could I see your boarding pass and ID one more time?" Naomi held her gaze for a moment before retrieving both items. "I believe you already checked these." "I did," Melissa admitted, "but it's our policy to be thorough in certain situations." Naomi's brow lifted slightly. Certain situations, Melissa hesitated. When something seems unusual. The words floated between them, and Naomi let the silence stretch just long enough to see if Melissa would fill it. She didn't. Instead, she offered a bright but strained smile and took the documents, giving them the same forensic inspection as before. Satisfied, she returned them without comment. Naomi slipped the items back into her blazer pocket, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Inside, she could feel the familiar weight pressing in, years of navigating spaces where she was both present and questioned, where credentials, payment, and presence were never quite enough, where her seat, her position, her right to be there always felt provisional in someone else's eyes. Patrick's voice carried from the galley. "Melissa, can you come here for a moment?" She disappeared from view, her low voice blending with his deeper tone. The cadence of their conversation was unmistakable, a report, a judgment, an action plan forming. The man in 1D, a tall figure with silver hair and a tablet in hand, shifted slightly in his seat to get a better look at Naomi. His eyes held the curiosity of someone watching an unfolding drama, the kind of curiosity that was detached yet hungry for entertainment. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She pulled it from the seat pocket. A call from a Washington, D.C. area code flashed on the screen. She declined it without hesitation, setting the phone face down on her tray table. The moment was not yet ripe. She picked up the in-flight magazine, flipping it open as though browsing for an article. But her mind was elsewhere. In her periphery, she saw Melissa return with Patrick. They approached together, Patrick's shoulders squared, his uniform crisp. "Ms. Carter," Patrick began, his tone careful. "We're going to need to verify the method of payment for your ticket. Could you provide the credit card used to purchase it?" Naomi took a slow breath, then reached into her bag for her wallet. The sleek black card slid easily between her fingers, the name Naomi Carter engraved in sharp silver letters. She placed it in Patrick's hand without a word. He examined it closely, as if expecting the plastic to confess some hidden fraud. "And do you have another form of identification, just to be sure I've already shown my ID twice?" Naomi said evenly. "Understood," Patrick replied. "But we have to be certain. There have been incidents." Naomi met his gaze. Incidents involving what Patrick glanced toward Melissa, then back. Passengers attempting to sit in first class without authorization. Naomi leaned back slightly. "And what made you suspect that applied to me?" Patrick's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer the question. Instead, he handed back the card and ID. "Thank you for your cooperation." Melissa stood just behind him, her posture rigid. Naomi wondered if either of them realized how clearly the contrast played out for every watching passenger. Charles had been offered champagne without question. Margaret had been greeted with warmth and left to her crossword puzzle. Yet Naomi's right to her seat was under a microscope. As Patrick and Melissa moved toward the galley, Naomi let her eyes rest on the window. The tarmac bustled below fuel trucks weaving between planes, a baggage cart trundling toward the cargo hold, a lone crew member signaling to someone out of sight. The view was a reminder of how many moving parts it took to keep a flight on schedule and how easily one person's decision could derail the entire operation. She thought of the message waiting on her phone, system access ready. She thought of the data stream she could trigger with a few keystrokes, the live monitoring tools designed to capture every interaction, every policy violation in real time. It wasn't about vengeance. It never was. It was about documentation, about showing the patterns that others could deny when all they saw was a single moment. The murmur of conversation from nearby rows washed over her. Margaret's voice, again, this time less hushed. It's just not the same as it used to be. Standards matter. Her husband mumbled something Naomi couldn't make out, but Margaret's sigh carried enough weight to fill in the gaps. Naomi turned a page in the magazine, though she hadn't read a word. From the galley, Patrick's voice rose just enough to carry. I'm going to check with the captain. If we can't verify, we may need to move her. Melissa's reply was quieter, but Naomi caught the word security. The syllables rolled around her mind, familiar but heavy. She knew how this script usually went. The difference today was that she had the pen. She picked up her phone, unlocking it with a tap. The cursor blinked in a secure messaging app. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Not yet, she told herself. Timing mattered more than the satisfaction of an immediate response. Every extra second would make the point clearer when the moment came. Patrick passed by again, his expression neutral, heading toward the cockpit. Melissa busied herself with a tray of drinks, studiously avoiding Naomi's eyes. The silver-haired man in 1D continued his not-so-subtle glances, the way people do when they want to watch but not get caught watching. Naomi closed the magazine and set it aside. She folded her hands in her lap, breathing in slowly, feeling the cabin's recycled air fill her lungs. This was not the first time she had been treated as a problem to solve rather than a passenger to serve, but this might be the last time the airline handled it without consequence. She glanced at her watch. The minute hand inched forward. 23 minutes to go. The captain's door was still closed, but Naomi could hear the muffled click of the latch as Patrick disappeared inside. Melissa lingered near the galley, shuffling glasses that didn't need shuffling, straightening napkins that were already straight. Every so often, her eyes drifted toward Naomi, then away again as if she were afraid of being caught. Naomi reached for the small glass of water the last flight attendant had set on her tray. It was lukewarm, but she took a slow sip anyway, letting the motion steady her breath. The air in the cabin felt heavier now, charged with the unspoken exchange between crew and passenger. Conversations in nearby seats softened, though the sideways glances did not. Charles Whitford in 1A scrolled lazily through his phone, the golden reflection of market tickers flickering in his glasses. His jacket hung neatly over the back of his seat, a flash of a designer label peeking from the inside pocket. Every few moments, he'd shift slightly, his gaze sliding in Naomi's direction, just long enough to confirm she was still there. Margaret Langston in 3B had given up pretending she wasn't watching. She leaned forward, speaking to her husband in a voice pitched just above a whisper, though she clearly wanted it to carry. I knew it the moment she came down the aisle. These days, they'll let anyone up here if you're not careful. Her husband murmured something inaudible. Margaret's eyes never left Naomi. The soft chime of the crew intercom interrupted the tension. Melissa answered, pressing the handset to her ear. Yes. She's still in the seat. Yes, we've checked twice. Her glance at Naomi was quick, but telling. She covered the mouthpiece, leaning toward the other flight attendant working the front galley. Jennifer, can you come up here? We might have a situation. The words settled over the cabin like smoke. Situation. It was vague enough to be meaningless and sharp enough to sting. Naomi could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. People adjusted their posture. Conversations faltered. The silver-haired man in 1D angled his tablet away from his face, openly watching now. He was waiting for the next scene. Jennifer appeared from the mid-cabin, her expression already serious. She looked at Melissa, then at Naomi, her eyes sweeping over her in a single, appraising glance. It was the look of someone searching for confirmation of an assumption they had already made. Melissa spoke first. "This is the passenger I was telling you about. The ticket matches the ID. But, well, you know..." Jennifer's lips tightened. "Ma'am," she said to Naomi, "can I see your boarding pass and identification again?" Naomi kept her voice level. "You've already checked both. I understand, but I'm the senior crew member on this flight. It's my responsibility to ensure the security of the cabin." Security. There it was again. The word carried a weight in air travel that few others could match. Naomi retrieved the items slowly, placing them in Jennifer's hand. The other woman inspected them with exaggerated care, turning the ID toward the light, comparing the photo to Naomi's face. She did not rush. "They match," Jennifer said finally, though her tone was reluctant. Still, with the rise in fraudulent boarding passes, Naomi interrupted gently. "Are you aware that I have now been asked for my documents 3 times in the past 10 minutes? Jennifer looked taken aback, but recovered quickly. "We just want to be thorough." Naomi studied her for a beat. "And do you apply this same level of thoroughness to all first-class passengers?" Jennifer didn't answer. Instead, she handed the documents back and turned toward Melissa. "Let's keep an eye on the situation until Patrick gets back from the cockpit." Melissa nodded, and the two of them retreated a few steps, speaking in low voices. The words weren't audible, but Naomi caught the cadence concern laced with justification, a shared conviction that they were right to question her. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She picked it up just far enough to read the screen. A message from Sophia Martinez: "Need update. On standby." Naomi typed a single line in reply, "Documenting. Not yet." Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment before she pressed it. She was aware of every second passing, aware that each unnecessary request for proof was another line in the record, another piece of a larger picture. Patrick returned from the cockpit, his expression unreadable. He moved to stand beside Jennifer and Melissa, listening as they recapped what had happened. He nodded once, then stepped toward Naomi. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I've spoken with the captain. We're going to need you to provide proof of purchase in addition to your credit card." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Proof of purchase. The card I gave you is the one used to buy the ticket." "Yes," Patrick said, "but if you have the original confirmation email or receipt, that would be helpful. And if I don't, then we may need to reassign your seat until we can confirm everything." Naomi let the words hang in the air. "Reassign my seat, the one I paid for." Patrick's stance didn't waver. "It's for the comfort and security of all our passengers." Margaret's voice cut in from 3B. "About time," she said, not bothering to lower her tone. "Some people think they can just take whatever they want." Charles in 1A chuckled softly, shaking his head as if the whole matter was beneath him, but somehow still amusing. Naomi looked from one face to another, then back at Patrick. "I will remain in this seat. If you have specific regulations that support your request, I'll be happy to review them." Jennifer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Naomi's gaze didn't flicker. "I prefer the way that follows the law." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Patrick sighed, as though dealing with a particularly stubborn problem. "We'll be right back." They retreated toward the galley again, the 3 crew members huddling like players mapping out their next move. The rest of the cabin seemed suspended between curiosity and discomfort. The silver-haired man in 1D shifted in his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. Naomi reached for her phone once more. The time was noted in her mind. Every interaction, every word, every look was being recorded in more ways than one. She opened her secure app and typed another brief message to Sophia. Situation escalating. Likely removal attempt. Stand by for go signal. She closed the phone and placed it face down on her tray table. Outside the window, the ground crew had stepped away from the plane, their work complete. The jet bridge was still connected, but not for much longer. Soon they'd push back, and the cabin's hierarchy would settle into the familiar rhythm of service. Unless she decided otherwise. Inside, her thoughts were a steady current beneath the surface calm. This wasn't about proving she had the right to a seat. It was about proving what happened when that right was questioned without cause. 21 minutes left. The stage was set. Patrick and Jennifer disappeared toward the galley again, leaving Melissa stationed in the aisle like a sentinel. Her back was straight, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. She was no longer pretending to adjust glassware or fold napkins. Her focus was fixed on Naomi's row, and she didn't seem concerned about how obvious it was. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, opening her laptop just enough to angle the screen away from prying eyes. The faint glow lit her face, reflecting the clean lines of a secure interface that could pass for an unremarkable spreadsheet to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. She tapped a few keys, her movements unhurried, deliberate, as if composing an ordinary email. But each keystroke had purpose. She was not writing, she was preparing. From the corner of her eye, she caught Charles Whitford lifting his champagne flute again. His expression was unreadable, though the slight lift of his eyebrows suggested quiet amusement at the scene unfolding beside him. He had the air of a man who'd seen these things before and assumed they would always end the same way, with someone like him sipping a drink and someone like her being walked out. Margaret Langston had shifted her body toward the aisle, her head angled so she could keep Naomi in her peripheral vision. Every so often, she murmured something to her husband, her voice pitched just high enough to carry, "I can't imagine why she's making such a fuss." Standards are important. It's not personal. It's just the rules. The silver-haired man in 1D had stopped pretending to work on his tablet. His gaze was fixed openly now, watching with the quiet curiosity of a man observing a chess match, waiting for the inevitable checkmate. The intercom chimed softly, drawing Melissa's attention. She lifted the handset. Yes, she's still here. No, she hasn't moved. Understood. Her glance toward Naomi carried a flicker of something between determination and apprehension. Jennifer emerged from the galley again, approaching with a kind of purposeful stride that signaled to the whole cabin that something official was about to happen. Patrick followed close behind, his expression set. "Ms. Carter," Jennifer began, her tone calm but lacking warmth. "We've spoken with the captain. We're still unable to verify your ticket purchase through our internal system. While we work to resolve this, we're going to ask you to relocate to a seat in economy." The words landed like a gavel strike. Every conversation in the cabin seemed to pause mid-sentence. Even the soft whir of the ventilation system seemed louder in the sudden hush. Naomi looked at Jennifer without blinking. "This is the seat I purchased. I will remain in it." Patrick's voice joined in, just a shade firmer. "Ma'am, this is for the smooth operation of the flight. We have other passengers to consider." And do those considerations include asking them to move from their paid seats without cause? Naomi's tone was steady, almost conversational. Margaret shifted again, leaning forward as if Naomi's question had been addressed to her. Well, if there's a question about the ticket, isn't it better to avoid any disruption? Jennifer folded her arms. We're not questioning you personally, Ms. Carter. We're questioning the documentation. Naomi's eyes held hers. Your documentation has been checked 3 times in the last 15 minutes. My ID matches my ticket. My credit card matches my purchase. The only thing in question here is why this level of scrutiny is being applied to me and not to others. Melissa's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Patrick glanced toward the cockpit, as if the captain's closed door might offer him a lifeline. Then he looked back at Naomi. If you choose not to cooperate, we may have to involve airport security. Naomi tilted her head slightly, as though weighing the words. Then she picked up her phone, pressed a single button, and spoke with quiet clarity. Sophia, I need you to be ready to document. Yes, real time. Stand by for a go signal. She ended the call, set the phone down, and folded her hands in her lap. The message was clear she was not the only one recording this. Patrick shifted his weight. We're trying to handle this professionally, Miss Carter. So am I, Naomi replied. The silence stretched for a few beats. Then Melissa leaned toward Jennifer, speaking in what she must have thought was a discreet stage whisper. Jennifer, if she won't move, we might have to escalate. The words traveled across the cabin like ripples in still water. The passengers in the first 3 rows had heard every syllable. Charles lifted his glass again, his expression unchanged. Margaret's lips pressed into that same thin line. Naomi closed her laptop with slow precision. You should know, she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear, that this interaction is being documented as part of an ongoing federal review into discriminatory boarding practices. Jennifer blinked, but quickly recovered. Federal review, Naomi met her gaze. Yes, and every word spoken here will be part of the record. Patrick's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He glanced again at the cockpit, then back at Jennifer. The hesitation was brief, but Naomi caught it. The intercom chimed again. Melissa answered, murmured a few words, then passed the handset to Patrick. His voice lowered, though not enough to hide the tension in it. Yes, she's here. Yes, I understand. I'll take care of it. When he hung up, he turned to Jennifer. Let's step away for a moment. They retreated to the galley again, leaving Melissa at her post. Naomi could feel the eyes on her from every direction now. She leaned back in her seat, her gaze drifting toward the window. On the tarmac, a baggage cart rolled past, its driver glancing up briefly before focusing on the task at hand. The normal rhythm of pre-flight operations carried on outside, oblivious to the small storm brewing inside. Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. Every unnecessary verification, every whispered aside, every public announcement of a situation was another stone in the foundation she was building. Jennifer returned first, her expression tighter than before. Ms. Carter, she said, we've decided to give you a few minutes to reconsider before we take further action. Naomi's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. Take all the time you need. The cabin was silent again, but it was no longer the relaxed quiet of pre-flight. It was the hush of an audience waiting for the next act, unsure whether they were watching a minor inconvenience or the opening move in something far larger. Naomi glanced at her watch. 19 minutes to go. Jennifer's footsteps were slow and deliberate as she made her way back down the aisle. The pause between each step seemed designed to signal both authority and inevitability. Behind her, Patrick followed, his face set in a tight mask that gave away none of what was brewing in the galley moments earlier. Melissa trailed behind them, still clutching a small stack of boarding passes from another passenger check. Naomi's seat felt like the center of a spotlight. The entire cabin had quieted again, as if the oxygen level had dropped and everyone was waiting to breathe until they knew the outcome. Even Charles in 1A, who had been lounging comfortably with his champagne, now sat straighter, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding beside him. Margaret Langston's gaze was fixed as if this was a courtroom drama and she was waiting for the verdict. Jennifer stopped just short of Naomi's brow. She clasped her hands in front of her, her posture crisp, her chin slightly lifted. "Ms. Carter," she began, her voice carrying through the cabin. "We've conferred with the captain and with our operations team. We need you to relocate to a seat in economy for the duration of this flight." Naomi's eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. And the reason for this request, Jennifer's expression, didn't change. "There is a question about the validity of your ticket purchase. I've provided my boarding pass, my identification, and my credit card," Naomi said, her tone still even. "All match." What part of that is, invalid Patrick stepped forward, adding his voice to the pressure. "It's about verification. We have a responsibility to our other passengers to ensure a smooth flight." "Which passengers?" Naomi asked quietly. "The ones who haven't been asked for their ID or payment method." Margaret leaned toward the aisle. "If there's a question, just move to another seat. It's not that complicated." Naomi turned her gaze to her without a trace of hostility. "Would you do the same if you had paid for this seat?" Margaret blinked, her mouth opening and closing before she looked away. Jennifer's patience seemed to fray. "We're not here to debate. You can move voluntarily now, or we can involve security when we land." Naomi could feel the weight of the moment settling around her. She reached slowly for her phone, pressed a single button, and lifted it to her ear. "Sophia," she said softly but clearly. "Documenting live. Cabin crew is making a formal request for me to vacate a paid first-class seat without cause. Yes. We're now at the removal threat stage. Stand by." Every word was deliberate, audible to anyone in the first few rows. Patrick's eyes flicked toward Charles in 1A, then to the silver-haired man in 1D, then back to Naomi. He seemed to realize that this was no longer a private conversation. When Naomi ended the call, she set the phone gently on the tray table. "I will remain in my seat," she said simply. Melissa stepped forward, her voice rising just enough to carry. "Some people think they can just take whatever they want," she said, glancing at Jennifer as if to confirm the sentiment. "It's not fair to the ones who earned their place here." Naomi did not look away from Jennifer. "If you believe I have violated any regulation, present it to me now." Jennifer's jaw tightened. "We don't need to justify our policies to passengers." Naomi's voice remained steady. "Policies that cannot be explained are policies that cannot be enforced." A faint murmur rippled through the nearby rows. The silver-haired man in 1D shifted again, leaning in slightly. Charles, for the first time, set his glass down. Patrick exhaled slowly, then leaned toward Jennifer. "Let's step away for a minute," he murmured. But Jennifer didn't move. "Ma'am," she said, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you refuse to cooperate, we will treat this as a security matter." There was that word again, security, as though Naomi's continued presence in the seat she had purchased was a threat to the safety of the aircraft. Naomi's phone buzzed once more. She picked it up and read the message without hiding the screen. Sophia's words were brief. "Federal contact ready. Give signal when needed." She slid the phone back onto the tray table and folded her hands. "If you're going to treat this as a security matter," she said, "you should be aware that I am a federal oversight official, conducting an active review of discriminatory boarding and seating practices." Melissa gave a short, incredulous laugh. Oh, come on. Jennifer's mouth tightened. We've heard claims like that before. Patrick looked uncertain for the first time. You're saying you're... What? Exactly. Naomi did not flinch. Chairwoman of the Congressional Committee on Aviation Safety and Civil Rights. Silence swept the cabin, a silence that felt almost physical. For a beat, no one moved. Then Charles in 1A leaned back, slowly, his expression shifting to something more thoughtful. Margaret's eyes darted between Naomi and the crew. Jennifer tried to recover. Well, we still have to follow procedure. Naomi's gaze was level. And I will be following mine. Patrick straightened. Captain needs an update. The 3 crew members turned and walked back toward the galley, their retreat more hesitant this time. Naomi took the opportunity to open her laptop fully, the glow casting a pale light across her face. The interface was unmistakable now to anyone who looked closely. Blue and white federal color scheme, official seal in the corner, live status updates scrolling down one side. She typed a brief note. Documentation phase crew issued removal threat without policy citation. Passenger remained seated. Public witness present. Closing the laptop halfway. She let it rest on her knees. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes scanned the cabin slowly, meeting the gaze of those who dared to look at her. The silver-haired man in 1D gave the faintest of nods, almost imperceptible, before looking away. Charles studied her for a moment, then reached for his drink again. Margaret shifted in her seat, suddenly less certain. Naomi glanced at her watch. 16 minutes. The timing was working in her favor. The cabin remained tense, the quiet broken only by the occasional clink of glassware in the galley. Outside the window, the jet bridge was still in place, but the last few ground crew members were stepping away. Soon, they would seal the door. When the crew returned, Naomi knew, the conversation would change. The question was how far they would take it before the reveal. She let her hands rest lightly on her laptop, her phone within reach. The stage was nearly set. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now, filling the silence that hung over the first-class cabin. The rest of the passengers had settled into an uneasy stillness, their curiosity sharper than their politeness. All eyes seemed to track Naomi as the crew returned from the galley, moving in a tight formation. Patrick led the way, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved into a mask of authority. Jennifer followed at his shoulder, her lips pressed into a thin line. Melissa trailed just behind, holding a tablet in one hand like a prop meant to give her presence more weight. Patrick stopped beside Naomi's seat. Ms. Carter, he began, his voice measured but firm. We have made multiple attempts to verify your ticket. At this point, we are treating your refusal to relocate as a potential security issue. The words dropped heavily into the air. Around them, a few passengers shifted in their seats. Margaret's eyes lit with the satisfaction of someone who believed order was finally being restored. Charles, on the other hand, leaned back slightly, watching with a more calculating gaze. Naomi looked up at Patrick, her voice calm and unhurried. Security issue. Based on what Patrick hesitated, as if the answer were obvious to him but somehow difficult to articulate in front of an audience. We have procedures. When a purchase cannot be confirmed internally, we cannot allow a passenger to remain in this section. You have my boarding pass, my ID, and my credit card. Naomi replied, They match. Your inability to confirm my purchase in your system is not my failure. It is your process. Jennifer stepped forward. Ma'am, I need to be very clear. If you do not move voluntarily, airport security will be called to meet this aircraft upon arrival. Naomi's voice dropped a fraction, the kind of drop that pulls people in closer. If you're going to call security, you should also call your CEO. Tell him Naomi Carter is on board, and she is conducting an active federal oversight audit on this flight. Melissa's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. "Oh, please, we've heard every story there is." Naomi reached for her laptop. She opened it fully this time, angling the screen so the 3 crew members could see the header at the top of the window. The official seal of the United States House of Representatives was impossible to mistake, flanked by the blue and white interface of a secure federal portal. Lines of text scrolled down the side incident logs, timestamps, location coordinates. Patrick's brows knit together. Jennifer leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the screen before snapping back to Naomi's face. Anyone can mock up something that looks official. Naomi's phone rang, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin. She tapped the answer button and placed the call on speaker. "Chairwoman Carter," a clear male voice said, "this is the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. We have received your real-time documentation of an active discrimination case aboard Flight 782. We are authorizing full intervention. Please proceed." Gasps rippled through the first 3 rows. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silver-haired man in 1D sat straighter, his attention fully locked. "Understood," Naomi said. "Stand by for further updates." When she ended the call, she looked directly at Jennifer. "I will not be moving from this seat." Jennifer's voice was quieter now, though she tried to keep it steady. "We still have procedures to follow." "And I have federal procedures to follow," Naomi replied. "Ones that supersede yours." Patrick shifted uncomfortably. His gaze darted toward the cockpit. Captain Harris should be made aware. "He already is," Naomi said, her tone still even. "And in approximately 12 minutes, so will the Federal Aviation Administration, the Department of Transportation, and your corporate headquarters." Melissa's voice had lost some of its edge, but she still tried to press the point. "We are only doing our jobs." Naomi met her eyes. "Doing your job should never mean violating federal civil rights protections." The tension in the cabin had shifted. Where there had been confident murmurs before, there was now an unsettled quiet. Even Margaret looked less certain, her gaze flicking between Naomi and the crew, as if recalibrating her position. Charles took a slow sip of his champagne, his expression unreadable. The silver-haired man in 1D leaned forward just enough to rest his forearms on his knees, as though settling in to watch the rest of a long-awaited scene. Jennifer seemed to weigh her next words carefully. "Ms. Carter, are you saying this incident will be part of an official investigation?" "I am not saying it," Naomi replied. "I am documenting it, and the documentation has already left this cabin." Patrick's voice was quieter now. "And what exactly happens in a case like this?" Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Federal oversight. A review of every discrimination complaint filed against your airline in the past 5 years. Mandatory compliance training. Public reporting." The weight of her words seemed to sink into the air between them. Melissa's grip tightened on her tablet. Jennifer's jaw worked as though she were holding back a retort. Patrick's shoulders sagged ever so slightly. Naomi closed her laptop with measured precision and set it aside. "You have a choice now," she said. "You can continue down this path and deepen the record against you, or you can correct course." No one spoke. Outside the window, the last of the ground crew was moving away. A faint vibration signaled the engines beginning their low idle before pushback. Naomi checked her watch. 10 minutes. The timing was perfect. Patrick glanced at Jennifer. She gave a small shake of her head, but it was unclear whether it was resistance or resignation. Melissa looked down at her tablet, scrolling through something, though her focus seemed elsewhere. The silver-haired man in 1D broke the silence. Sounds to me like you've got a bigger problem than a seating issue." No one from the crew acknowledged him, but the observation seemed to hang in the air. Margaret turned in her seat, her expression pinched. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though her voice lacked the certainty it had carried earlier. Naomi folded her hands in her lap again, her posture calm, composed, unshaken. Every second they hesitated was another second that worked in her favor. The cabin felt different now. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone could feel it. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles, invisible to most but present all the same. Soon, the conversation would no longer be about whether she belonged in the seat. It would be about the consequences of assuming she did not. The door to the cockpit opened with a muted click. Captain Harris stepped into the aisle, his tall frame filling the narrow space. His cap was under one arm, his eyes scanning the cabin with the deliberate calm of someone used to commanding attention without raising his voice. He walked forward until he stood just behind Patrick and Jennifer, his presence an unspoken signal that whatever was about to happen mattered. "Ms. Carter," Harris said, inclining his head slightly. "I understand there's been some difficulty with your seating arrangements." Naomi's eyes met his. "The difficulty," she said evenly, "is not with my seating arrangements. It's with the repeated and unfounded challenges to my right to occupy this seat." Patrick shifted beside him. "Captain, we've been unable to verify her purchase in the system. Her boarding pass, ID, and credit card match." Naomi interrupted, her voice calm but carrying. "You've confirmed them multiple times. This is no longer about verification. It's about perception." The captain's gaze flicked from Naomi to Patrick, then to Jennifer. "Perception." "Yes," Naomi said. "The perception that I don't belong here." Her tone was steady, but the cabin felt the weight of her words. A murmur ran through a few rows. Charles in 1A was still, his glass untouched on the armrest. Margaret looked out the window for a moment before glancing back toward Naomi. Naomi reached down to her laptop, opened it fully, and turned the screen so the captain could see. The seal of the United States House of Representatives gleamed in the upper left corner. Below it, her name appeared in bold Chairwoman Naomi Carter. Congressional Committee on Aviation Safety and Civil Rights. Beside it, a real-time log of incident details scrolled steadily. "This," she said, "is a live federal documentation portal. Every word, every action in this cabin for the last 23 minutes has been recorded and transmitted." Melissa's face went pale. Jennifer's lips parted, but no words came out. Patrick's eyes darted back to the captain. "And you're telling me," Harris said carefully, "that this is part of an official federal investigation," Naomi finished, "into systemic discrimination in commercial aviation. You have been participating in a case study that will be reviewed by the Department of Transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, and Congress." The cabin fell into absolute stillness. Even the subtle hum of the engines seemed quieter. Somewhere behind Naomi, a passenger let out a slow, audible exhale. Captain Harris straightened, his expression tightening. "I was not informed. You weren't supposed to be," Naomi said. "This review is conducted in real-world conditions. That means observing unaltered behavior." Patrick's voice was unsteady. "We didn't know. That's exactly the point," Naomi replied. Melissa took a small step back, her grip tightening on the tablet she'd been holding like a shield. "We were following procedure," she said quietly. "Procedures," Naomi said, "do not excuse bias. If your procedure results in a disproportionate number of passengers of color being challenged in premium cabins, it's not a procedure, it's a problem." Jennifer's eyes dropped to the floor. Naomi closed the laptop halfway and placed it on the armrest. "Here's what will happen next," she said, her tone still calm, almost gentle. We will continue this flight without further interference. Upon landing, this crew will be met by federal investigators. Your airline's CEO has already been contacted. All of this is part of the record. Margaret's voice, thin and hesitant now, broke the silence. Is this going to be on the news? Naomi's gaze moved to her. Yes. But more importantly, it will be in the regulations that govern how you are treated on your next flight. The silver-haired man in 1D leaned forward, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Looks like you're in the right seat after all. No one from the crew responded. Naomi took a slow breath. She could feel the balance in the room shifting, the quiet recalibration of people realizing they were no longer in control of the narrative. The captain gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the new reality, then turned to Patrick. "Make sure the rest of the flight runs without incident," he said. Patrick's yes. Captain was barely audible. Harris replaced his cap and returned to the cockpit, leaving the 3 crew members in an awkward stillness. Jennifer's posture had lost its rigidity. Melissa's eyes avoided Naomi's entirely. Patrick seemed focused on the far wall of the galley. Naomi picked up her water and took a slow sip, letting the moment breathe. The passengers were still watching, but the looks were different now. There was curiosity, yes, but also something else, respect perhaps, or the recognition of having witnessed a turning point. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. A message from Sophia FAA on standby at destination. All data received. She typed a short reply. Continue monitoring. Margaret shifted in her seat. When Naomi looked at her, the older woman's face softened. I shouldn't have. Well, I spoke too soon, Margaret murmured. Naomi's tone was gentle, but firm. The important thing is what you do next time. Melissa moved down the aisle without meeting anyone's eyes. Charles watched her go, then turned to Naomi. I don't think I've ever seen a flight change direction without leaving the ground, he said quietly. Naomi allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the course correction happens right where you're sitting. She closed her laptop fully and slid it back into her bag. The work for now was done, but the outcome was still in motion. She could feel the current running beneath the stillness in the cabin, pulling everything toward the inevitable landing and what would follow. The engines rumbled slightly louder, a signal that pushback was imminent. Outside the window, the jet bridge was beginning to retract. Inside, the power had already shifted. Naomi rested her hands in her lap and exhaled slowly. There were still 9 minutes until her deadline, but the reveal had come right on time. The door to the cockpit closed behind Captain Harris, leaving an altered atmosphere in the cabin. The tension was still there, but its source had changed. It no longer radiated from Naomi's seat. Now it seemed to cling to the crew, following them with every step they took. Patrick remained near the galley, speaking in low tones to Jennifer and Melissa. Their posture was different now, the stiff certainty of earlier replaced with the careful, measured movements of people who knew they were under a microscope. Every glance between them looked like a silent calculation how much could be undone before landing, and how much damage was already irreversible. Naomi sat in 2A, perfectly still, her hands resting lightly in her lap. It was not the stillness of passivity. It was the stillness of someone who had decided exactly when to move and how far to go. Around her, passengers shifted in their seats, their body language less wary, more openly curious. Charles Whitford, who had until now treated the scene like distant theater, leaned slightly toward her. His voice was pitched low, but not so low that others couldn't hear. That was impressive. Naomi turned her head, meeting his gaze with a calm acknowledgement. It wasn't about impressing anyone. Then what was it about? Charles asked. Naomi's answer was simple. Accountability. Margaret Langston was listening too, her eyes darting between Naomi and Charles. She sat back in her seat, frowning faintly as though something in her understanding of the world had shifted just enough to be uncomfortable. Melissa made her way down the aisle, offering drinks without meeting Naomi's eyes. When she reached Margaret, her voice was polite but subdued. "Can I get you anything?" Ma'am Margaret shook her head. "No, thank you." Melissa moved on. She didn't linger at Naomi's row, didn't offer the same exaggerated scrutiny she had earlier. But the avoidance was telling. Naomi reached for her laptop, opening it just enough to check the live log. Every entry from the past half hour was there, time-stamped and tagged. Witness reactions, crew statements, context notes. The feed from Sophia's monitoring team was coming through clean, with short updates confirming that the Department of Transportation and FAA liaisons were already preparing to meet the flight on arrival. A message flashed at the top of the screen, Corporate HQ contact confirmed. Executive escalation in progress. She closed the laptop again, setting it gently on the armrest. The point had been made. Now came the waiting. Patrick finally left the galley and approached her seat. His tone was different now, stripped of its earlier authority. "Ms. Carter, is there anything I can get for you?" "No." "Thank you," Naomi said. There was a pause, as if he expected her to say more. When she didn't, he gave a short nod and retreated. It was a small moment, but the cabin noticed. Conversations that had been hushed now picked up, some passengers leaning toward each other to whisper. The shift was subtle but irreversible. The crew was no longer managing Naomi, they were responding to her. The silver-haired man in 1D spoke for the first time. "So what happens now?" Naomi considered her words. "Now we land, and then the process begins." He nodded slowly, seeming to understand more than he said. Melissa passed by again, this time without the brisk confidence she'd displayed earlier. Her eyes flicked toward Naomi's laptop bag, then quickly away. It was the look of someone realizing they had underestimated the scale of what they were dealing with. Another message buzzed on Naomi's phone. She read it without hiding the screen. Airline booking system access restricted for audit. New reservations frozen. Executive team in emergency session. She placed the phone back on the tray table, her expression unchanged. She knew this was just the beginning. The visible consequences would take days, weeks even, but the machinery was already in motion. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Will they lose their jobs? The question was tentative, almost uneasy. Naomi met her gaze. "That's not my decision. The investigation will determine responsibility." Margaret looked down at her folded hands. I didn't think it was a big deal." "That's the problem," Naomi said gently. "It never seems like a big deal to the people who aren't on the receiving end." Margaret's eyes softened, and for the first time since boarding, her posture lost some of its stiffness. She gave a small nod and turned back toward her husband. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pushing back shortly. Our flight time today will be approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We thank you for your patience as we completed a brief delay." No mention of the real cause. No hint of the scene that had just played out. But the cabin knew, and Naomi suspected the story would travel far beyond the walls of the plane. As the plane began to roll backward from the gate, Naomi allowed herself a moment to look out the window. The airport terminal slipped slowly past, ground crew waving their final signals. The light was beginning to shift as clouds moved across the afternoon sun, throwing long shadows over the tarmac. She thought about the times she had been in similar situations without the authority she carried now. times when the outcome had been quietly humiliating, and the only thing left to do was walk away. This was not one of those times. This time, she could change the trajectory, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after. Her phone buzzed again. Sophia's message was concise media holding for statement after landing. "Confirm if you want press." Naomi typed back. "No statement. Official channels only." She didn't need headlines to make the point. The real work would happen in boardrooms, regulatory meetings, and training sessions. The passengers in this cabin would tell their own version of events, and that would be enough to keep the conversation alive until the formal investigation was complete. Patrick passed by once more, this time with 2 bottles of water. He set one on Naomi's tray table without a word. It was a gesture that might have seemed polite in another context, but now it felt like quiet acknowledgement. She nodded once in thanks. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod back. The cabin settled into a strange quiet as the engines roared to life. Naomi kept her gaze on the window, but her attention was everywhere on the crew's altered demeanor, on the shifting body language of the passengers, on the invisible network of communications already reshaping the fate of the airline. The shift in power was complete. Now, it was just a matter of letting it run its course. The engines settled into a steady hum as the plane leveled off above the clouds. Sunlight streamed through the oval windows, casting pale gold across the polished armrests. The fastened seatbelt sign dimmed with a soft chime, and a low murmur of conversation returned to the cabin. But the energy was different now. The easy, confident tone of pre-flight chatter had been replaced by something more cautious, like everyone was aware they were sitting in the middle of a story that would soon be bigger than any of them. Naomi unfolded her tray table and opened her laptop again. The federal portal was still running in the background, each line of the incident log growing longer with fresh entries. She scrolled once, confirming that Sophia's team was still receiving every update. In the corner of the screen, a new notification appeared: Airline Reservation Network, status locked. No new bookings? Internal systems flagged for audit. She wasn't surprised. These measures were the natural first step when an active discrimination case intersected with federal oversight. What caught her attention was the timing. The lockout had happened less than 30 minutes after her initial message. That meant the airline's executives were already scrambling. A shadow passed over her table. Patrick stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his expression controlled but visibly strained. "Ms. Carter," he said, "is there anything you require at this time?" Naomi met his eyes. "No, thank you." He hesitated, then added, "We've been instructed to ensure your comfort. That would mean allowing the remainder of the flight to proceed without further interference." Naomi replied. Patrick inclined his head slightly. "Understood." He moved on, but Naomi noticed the stiffness in his shoulders as he walked away. This wasn't just about this flight anymore. He knew it, and so did she. A few rows ahead, Charles Whitford was speaking quietly to another passenger, his tone low but animated. He glanced toward Naomi more than once, and each time she returned her attention to the screen. Margaret Langston had not spoken since their brief exchange earlier. She kept her eyes on her crossword puzzle, but her pen hadn't moved in several minutes. Another notification appeared on Naomi's laptop. Internal Communications Executive Leadership convened. Crisis Management Protocol initiated. Naomi read the note twice. The airline wasn't just handling an onboard incident. They were managing a corporate crisis with potential regulatory consequences. The fact that it was happening mid-flight meant the news had moved fast. Melissa approached Naomi's row with a tray of drinks for other passengers. Her voice was softer now, the crisp edge gone. "Would you like something to drink, Ms. Carter?" she asked. "Water is fine. Naomi said. Melissa poured it from a chilled bottle into a clear glass and placed it gently on Naomi's tray. She hesitated before speaking again. I want to apologize if my actions caused offense earlier. Naomi took a slow sip of the water before answering. What you should want, she said evenly, is to understand why you acted differently toward me than toward other passengers. Melissa's eyes dropped. I was just trying to do my job. That's the most common explanation I hear, Naomi replied. The problem is when doing your job means treating people unequally. Melissa didn't respond. She gave a small nod and moved away, her posture less sure than before. From the corner of her eye, Naomi saw Margaret glance up at her, then away again. The exchange had been quiet, but in a cabin where every ear was tuned to the undercurrent of tension, it had been impossible to miss. The seatbelt sign flicked on again as the plane encountered a pocket of turbulence. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. As Naomi buckled hers, her phone buzzed on the tray. She turned it over to see another message from Sophia Media Outlets picking up internal leak. Story will break before landing. Recommend preparing statement. She typed back, no direct comment. All responses through official channels. She wasn't here to build a personal headline. She was here to make the airline answer for a system that allowed this to happen at all. The people who needed to know would know. The rest would feel the effects soon enough. Patrick returned, leaning slightly toward Naomi's seat. We've received confirmation that corporate leadership is in contact with the Department of Transportation. There may be officials waiting when we arrive. There will be, Naomi said. Patrick cleared his throat. I want to make sure you understand that none of this was personal. Naomi studied him for a moment. Personal would be one crew member's bias. This was procedural, which is why it matters. He didn't have a reply. He simply nodded and stepped away. The turbulence eased, and the seatbelt sign went off again. Naomi looked around the cabin. People who had been watching her closely earlier now pretended to be absorbed in their devices or reading materials, but the glances kept coming. It was the kind of subtle shift she had seen before, when witnesses realized they might be asked later what they saw. Another line of text appeared on Naomi's screen. Immediate suspension pending investigation. Flight 782 involved crew. She read it without visible reaction. Consequences were already in motion. Margaret's voice broke the quiet between them. Will they all lose their jobs? Naomi's tone was calm. That depends on the investigation. Margaret nodded slowly. It's just different when you see it happen right in front of you. That's why documentation matters, Naomi said. It turns an opinion into evidence. Margaret didn't answer, but she looked at Naomi with something closer to respect than suspicion. Outside the window, the afternoon light was shifting, the horizon painted with long streaks of gold and shadow. The captain announced they would begin their descent in 25 minutes. Naomi closed her laptop, sliding it back into her bag. The critical part of her work for this flight was done. Now it was about what came next. She glanced at her phone one last time. Sophia's latest update was clear FAA investigators on standby at gate. Federal marshals aware. Ground team briefed. Naomi folded her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead. Whatever awaited them on the ground, the direction of the day was already set. The captain's announcement about their descent had faded into the steady hum of the engines. The golden light slanted across the cabin now, catching in the edges of champagne flutes and the metal trim of seatbelts. Naomi could feel the shift, that subtle anticipation people have in the last half hour of a flight, when conversations wind down and thoughts turn toward what's waiting on the ground, But this wasn't an ordinary last half hour. She could sense the weight of unspoken questions pressing in from the rows around her. Passengers who had watched the earlier confrontation now seemed torn between wanting to ask more and wanting to pretend nothing had happened. The crew's movements were subdued, their voices lowered. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the cabin was holding its breath. Naomi leaned back, fingers laced loosely in her lap. She had intended to stay silent for the rest of the flight, but the truth was, silence wouldn't help anyone here understand the deeper point. And understanding was the only way to prevent this from becoming just another story told in whispers before fading away. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, the movement drawing a few glances from nearby passengers. She stepped into the aisle, her voice steady but not loud. "Excuse me," she said, meeting the eyes of the people closest to her. "I know we're all ready to land, but I'd like to say something." It wasn't a demand, it was an invitation, and that was why people turned toward her instead of away. The hum of quiet conversation softened until the only sounds were the engines and the faint clink of glassware from the galley. Naomi kept her tone even, conversational. What happened earlier wasn't just about me, and it wasn't about one misunderstanding. It was about a pattern that too many people here might not have noticed because it doesn't happen to you. She let that sit for a moment. Margaret's hands were still on her crossword, but her eyes were fixed on Naomi now. Charles leaned forward in his seat. "When I boarded," Naomi continued, "I was challenged, not once, but multiple times, despite having the correct boarding pass, ID, and payment. At the same time, other passengers who looked different from me were allowed to pass without question. That's the pattern." A murmur passed through the cabin. Some passengers glanced toward Melissa and Patrick, who stood near the galley. Naomi's eyes moved across the rows. "Some people here might think it was just procedure. That's the word I heard earlier. But here's the thing, if a procedure produces unequal treatment, it's not neutral. It's biased. And when bias becomes part of procedure, it stops being an accident." She saw Charles nod once, slowly. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, as if she was hearing something she wished she'd known years earlier. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Naomi said. "I'm here because my job is to make sure the systems we all rely on work for everyone, not just for the people who look a certain way. And I want you to remember something. The difference between a bad moment and a bad system is whether anyone's willing to fix it." Her voice stayed soft, but there was a force in it that carried through the cabin. She didn't raise her hand for emphasis, didn't pace the aisle. She stood still, letting the words themselves do the work. "Earlier, I heard someone ask if this was going to be on the news. She said, 'It probably will.' But that's not the part that matters most. What matters most is what you do the next time you see something like this happen. Whether you speak up, whether you stay silent, whether you pretend it's not your concern." Her gaze swept over the cabin one last time. "You're all witnesses now. That means you have a choice about what kind of witness you want to be." She gave a small nod, then returned to her seat without waiting for applause. There was no applause. There was only a quiet that felt heavier than before, but in a different way, as though the air itself had shifted to carry the weight of what had been said. Margaret leaned over slightly as Naomi buckled her seatbelt. "I've flown first class for 30 years, she said quietly. "And I've never thought about how it might feel for someone else. Not really. I will now." Naomi looked at her for a moment, then said, "That's a start." Melissa passed down the aisle, collecting glasses. She paused at Naomi's seat and said softly, I heard you." Naomi didn't smile, but her voice was kind. Then, "Make sure it changes something. Melissa nodded once and moved on. The rest of the descent was quiet. The cabin lights dimmed, the skyline of the destination city glowing faintly in the distance through the windows. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. The landing would be the next stage, the visible one. But what mattered most would happen after, in meeting rooms, in training sessions, in policy rewrites that most passengers would never see. As the wheels touched down with a soft jolt, Naomi felt the subtle shift in her chest that came with knowing the work was far from done. The brakes engaged, the engines roared, and the cabin tilted forward slightly before settling. Outside, the runway lights blurred past. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate." Naomi opened her eyes and straightened in her seat. The curtain between first class and the galley was already drawn back, and she could see two figures in dark suits waiting just inside the jet bridge through the small crack in the cabin door. Federal investigators, right on time. Inside the cabin, passengers gathered their things slowly, eyes darting between Naomi, the crew, and the door ahead. Some moved as if they wanted to speak to her but stopped short. That was fine. The important thing was that they would remember. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Patrick's voice announced that passengers could deplane, his tone professional but subdued. No mention of the officials waiting, no hint of the conversation that would happen next. Naomi picked up her bag and stood. She waited until the aisle cleared enough for her to walk forward, the quiet around her almost palpable. When she reached the door, Patrick stepped aside without a word. She met his eyes for the briefest moment, then stepped past him onto the jet bridge. The air was cooler here, and sharper. The two officials straightened as she approached. "Chairwoman Carter," one said, "we've been briefed. Shall we?" She gave a single nod. "Let's begin." The cool air of the jet bridge carried a faint scent of jet fuel and metal. Naomi stepped forward, her bag balanced easily on one shoulder, flanked by the two federal investigators. Their badges glinted briefly under the fluorescent lights. The taller of the two, Agent Daniels, walked slightly ahead, while Agent Vega matched Naomi's pace, her tone low and direct. "We've secured a private conference room adjacent to the gate," Vega said. "Interviews will be conducted individually, starting with you, then crew, then select passengers." Naomi nodded. "Make sure the incident log is time-stamped to the minute. I want the sequence airtight. We've already synced with your office," Vega replied. "Every statement will be cross-verified against your feed." As they neared the gate, Naomi could see the effect the incident was already having. Passengers from economy were trickling out behind them, their faces alert and curious. Some had overheard fragments of what had happened in first class. Others were piecing it together from snippets they'd caught in the boarding area before departure. A few were already on their phones, typing furiously. The gate agents stood stiffly behind their podiums, glancing at Naomi with a mix of apprehension and professional detachment. They knew something had happened. They just didn't know the scale. Naomi stepped aside to let Margaret Langston pass. The older woman paused, touching Naomi's arm lightly. "I hope they listen," she said quietly. "They will," Naomi answered. "They don't have a choice." Margaret gave a small nod and continued toward the terminal. Charles Whitford followed, his phone to his ear. "Yes," he was saying, "I saw it myself." They didn't know who she was. Now they're in for a very public lesson. Inside the small conference room, the lighting was warmer, but the air was tense. A table had been set with a carafe of water, a legal pad, and a slim recording device already blinking red. Naomi placed her bag neatly on the floor beside the chair and sat. Daniels closed the door. "We'll keep this efficient," he said. "Walk us through the sequence, starting from boarding." Naomi spoke clearly, her memory precise. She detailed the boarding process, the repeated requests for identification, the contrast with how other passengers were treated, the specific phrases used, and the way crew members conferred with each other between each challenge. Her tone never rose, but every detail was sharp enough to cut. Vega asked targeted follow-ups, confirming that Naomi had provided all required documents on first request and that her seat assignment had been correct in the system. Daniels noted the names of crew members involved, matching them to the manifest. As the interview wrapped, Vega said, "We'll need your direct authorization to access the live log from your device." Naomi unlocked her laptop and slid it toward them. "Everything you need is in the folder labeled Flight 782 Incident. It's already tagged by category." Daniels scanned the directory and whistled softly. "This is thorough." "That's the point," Naomi said. Outside the conference room, voices were rising. Naomi could hear Melissa's distinctive tone, still polite, but edged with defensiveness as she was guided toward another interview space. Patrick's voice came next, lower but tense, like someone aware the ground had shifted under his feet. Naomi stood and stepped into the hallway. Passengers clustered nearby, some lingering intentionally, others pretending to scroll their phones while listening in. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself carried static. Agent Vega joined her. Corporate has been notified that their booking and scheduling systems will remain locked until further notice. The executive team is requesting an immediate call with your office. "They'll have to wait," Naomi said. "The process comes first." A young man in a hoodie approached hesitantly. Excuse me, ma'am, I was in row 22. I heard most of it. I recorded some audio. Do you want it?" "Yes," Naomi said simply. Vega took his phone and began transferring the file to the evidence system. Another passenger, a woman in business attire, stepped forward. "I was in the lounge before boarding. I heard them say they were going to double-check certain passengers just to be safe. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now I do." Naomi met her gaze. "Thank you for saying that out loud." Word was spreading. Even without the media leak Sophia had warned her about, Naomi could see the story taking shape in real time through these first-hand accounts. Every retelling would add weight to the chain of evidence and pressure to the people trying to contain it. Her phone buzzed. A short message from Sophia read Newswire picking up anonymous source. "Story live within the hour." Naomi looked toward the wide windows facing the runway. The plane she had just left was still parked at the gate, ground crew moving around it in practiced coordination. Inside, she knew the crew's world had tilted in ways they hadn't yet begun to process. Patrick emerged from his interview room, avoiding her eyes as he walked toward the jet bridge. Melissa followed soon after, her cheeks flushed. Neither spoke. Daniels returned. "We'll be holding the crew for follow-up questioning. They've been informed of the administrative leave pending investigation." Naomi inclined her head. "Good." As she gathered her bag, a gate agent approached. "Ms. Carter, the airline COO is on the line and requesting to speak with you directly." Naomi considered this for a moment. "Tell them to coordinate through my office. I'm not engaging outside formal channels." The gate agent hesitated. They said it's urgent. It's urgent because they're in damage control mode," Naomi said evenly. "That's not my priority." She turned and walked toward the terminal, the investigators keeping pace. Around her, the ripple effect continued, passengers typing, whispering, sending messages out into the digital world where this flight story was already becoming something larger. Beyond the security glass, the city stretched into the fading light, its skyline etched against the deepening sky. Naomi knew that by the time the sun fully set, calls would be made in boardrooms across the industry, every airline reminding its staff of policies that should have been common sense. And still, she also knew, it wouldn't be enough until the systems themselves were rebuilt. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and kept walking. The night ahead would be long. But the work had already begun. The conference hall inside the terminal was meant for routine meetings between airline staff and airport officials. Tonight, it had been transformed into a command center. Laptops were open on every table, phone calls happening in rapid succession. The hum of conversation was urgent but controlled, the way it gets when everyone knows a decision is about to have consequences far beyond this room. Naomi stepped inside with Agents Vega and Daniels at her side. Heads turned immediately. Some faces she recognized from industry events, executives who usually carried themselves with the confidence of people who could end or approve million-dollar contracts with a single word. Now, their eyes carried something else: calculation, wariness. The airline's COO, a silver-haired man named Robert Kane, stood near the center. His voice was crisp but tight as he spoke to one of his legal advisors. When he noticed Naomi, he straightened, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Chairwoman Carter," he said, stepping forward, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Better circumstances start with better practices. Naomi replied. Her tone was even, but the weight of the moment carried in every syllable. Kane gestured toward a quieter corner. "May we speak privately?" "You may speak," Naomi said, "but I will not engage without these agents present. Transparency matters." He hesitated, then nodded. Understood. They moved a few steps aside. Kane clasped his hands in front of him, lowering his voice. "We're aware of the seriousness of this matter. I want you to know immediate action is being taken. The crew involved has been placed on administrative leave. We are reviewing every recorded interaction from today. Action without accountability is theater," Naomi said. "What you do next will decide whether this is a press statement or a systemic change." Kane's jaw tightened. "We will cooperate fully with the investigation." "You'll do more than that," Naomi said. "You'll open your training modules, your enforcement protocols, and your complaint resolution history for federal review. This wasn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom." He started to respond, but Daniels cut in. "Mr. Kane, your legal team is already aware this investigation is expanding to include all domestic operations. Let's not waste time pretending otherwise." Naomi didn't linger. She turned back toward the center of the room, where Vega was speaking quietly into a headset. Across the hall, Melissa sat in a chair near the wall, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Patrick stood a few feet away, his posture rigid. Neither spoke. A gate agent entered, holding a printed memo. She handed it to Kane, who read it, then glanced at Naomi. "Our booking system is still offline," he said. "That's the least of your problems," Naomi replied. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia News Outlets leading with headline "Congressional Chairwoman Removed from Seat on Flight 782. Public statement from your office drafted and ready." Naomi typed back, "Release it." She knew the story was already beyond her control. That was fine. The truth didn't need managing. It needed daylight. The agents began calling in passengers for their statements. Margaret Langston came first. She walked slowly but spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I've been flying first class for decades," she said, "and I've never seen anyone questioned the way Ms. Carter was. It was wrong." Charles Whitford followed, delivering his account with the precision of a man used to corporate negotiations. "They treated her differently from the start," he said. "If they can do that to her, they can do it to anyone." Each testimony added another layer, another voice in a growing chorus. By the time the last passenger was interviewed, the narrative was undeniable. Naomi stepped outside into the terminal's quieter wing, looking out through the glass at the runway. The night was still, the air thick with the hum of lights and distant engine noise. She could see the outline of Flight 782 parked further down, its cabin dark now. Vega joined her. "The FAA will recommend a provisional operations review," she said. "Could ground a portion of their fleet until compliance is confirmed." "That's a start," Naomi said. "You know," Vega added, "a lot of people in there wanted to frame this as a misunderstanding." Naomi's eyes stayed on the runway. They always do. Because misunderstanding feels fixable without change. Bias doesn't. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Kane approached again, his voice lower now, almost careful. "Chairwoman Carter, this could hurt us for years." Naomi turned to face him fully. "Good. Maybe you'll remember it long enough to fix the reason it happened." There was nothing left to say. Kane stepped back, and Naomi walked toward the exit. In the rideshare on the way to her hotel, she finally let herself exhale. She thought about the passengers still processing what they'd seen, about Melissa and Patrick replaying the day in their minds, about the executives who would spend the night drafting responses that would be dissected by morning news anchors. And she thought about the people who wouldn't hear this story directly, the quiet travelers who had faced the same kind of challenge without anyone to witness it, without the authority or platform to push back. For them, this wasn't news, it was routine. She reached for her phone and opened the statement Sophia's team had released. It was short, direct, and without apology. Equal treatment in air travel is not optional. Today's events highlight the urgent need for consistent accountability across all levels of airline operation. We will ensure that change is not only promised, but enforced. Naomi closed her phone and looked out at the blur of city lights passing by. She didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. What she needed was the long work the months ahead of committee hearings, policy rewrites, and holding those promises in place until they became standard. As the car turned onto the avenue leading to her hotel, she allowed herself one quiet thought. This wasn't the end of a flight. It was the beginning of a shift. She would make sure of it. Naomi Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. In a world where injustice often hides behind polite words and procedures, her quiet refusal to be diminished lit a fire that reached boardrooms, courtrooms, and homes across the country. This story isn't just about one flight. It's about every moment when someone is told, directly or indirectly, that they don't belong. It's about how those moments can be turned into catalysts for change when someone refuses to let them pass unnoticed. To the passengers who spoke up, to those who will think twice the next time they see bias unfolding, and to everyone who knows what it's like to be singled out for the wrong reasons, this story belongs to you. And to those who still believe discrimination can be hidden behind policy, remember this: the truth always finds its way into the light. If Naomi's stand moved you, let it also remind you justice isn't loud, but it is relentless. Thank you for watching and for standing with us against every form of prejudice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you're here for the next story that needs to be told.